What is going on, my YouTubers and YouTubettes? It's Jahji here, and a few days ago I went down the Kyler Murray rabbit hole, and the whole point of that video was basically this: where the hell did the two-sport athlete go? Because Kyler Murray was drafted 9th overall in Major League Baseball and 1st overall in the NFL, but he chose football. And today, the idea of somebody actually playing in 2 Major League professional sports sounds almost impossible. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders weren't even close to the only people who actually pulled this off. There have been NFL players who became MLB All-Stars, NBA players who became Major League pitchers, a guy who even won the World Series and then went and started collecting NBA championships afterwards. And there's exactly one dude in history who played both in the MLB and the NHL. So today, I'm ranking the 10 greatest two-sport professional athletes ever. And I had to establish some rules. To qualify for this list, you actually had to reach the highest professional level in 2 sports. So no, well, he got drafted or he played baseball in college. So this does unfortunately mean that Michael Jordan does not qualify because he never reached the MLB. The aforementioned Kyler Murray obviously doesn't qualify yet, and Russell Wilson doesn't qualify either. Former MLB stars who had some success in other sports were Tom Glavine, who was drafted by the NHL's Los Angeles Kings but never actually played in the NHL, and you have Dave Winfield, who was drafted by the NBA and ABA but never played professional basketball. So it sounds very elementary, but I just want to reiterate, we're talking about people who actually did it. And the biggest thing I'm rewarding isn't just how great you were in your best sport, it's how legitimate you were in your second best sport. Because otherwise, you could become one of the greatest football players ever and play 7 baseball games and suddenly we're calling you the greatest two-sport athlete in history. That's not what I'm looking for. I want the guys where you can look at both careers and say, wait, he was actually good at both of these? And trust me, some of these names are ridiculous. So sit back, grab your lunch, turn on the AC and cozy up under a blanket, share this with a friend who loves sports, and let's get started. At number 10, we have Frank Baumholtz. This is probably the first name where half the audience is already thinking, who? And that's exactly why I wanted to make this video. Frank Baumholtz played professional basketball for the Cleveland Rebels in the Basketball Association of America, the league that would soon become a part of the NBA. And he wasn't just sitting on the bench. In the 1946-47 season, Baumholtz averaged 14 points per game. Now, remember the era we're talking about. The league itself averaged dramatically fewer points than modern basketball, so 14 points a night was legitimate production. Look at it as your average 18 to 22 point score in the NBA today. And after legitimizing himself in basketball, Baumholtz essentially said, alright, I'm gonna go play baseball now, and somehow became even better at that. He spent parts of 10 seasons in the major leagues, primarily with the Cincinnati Reds and Chicago Cubs. He finished 5th in the 1947 Rookie of the Year voting, and for my non-baseball fans, that's the same Rookie of the Year race that was won by Jackie Robinson. And 5 years after that, in 1952, Baumholtz hit .325 and finished 2nd in the National League batting race behind Stan Musial. His career batting average, .290. But what separates him from a lot of the guys I left off this list, this wasn't somebody who reached another league for 2 weeks. Frank Baumholtz could legitimately play professional basketball, then became a very good major league hitter. Most people today have probably never heard his name, but that right there, folks, is a two-sport athlete. Number 9, Bud Grant. Yes, that Bud Grant. If you're an NFL fan, you probably know Bud Grant as the legendary Minnesota Vikings coach. 4 Super Bowl appearances, Pro Football Hall of Fame, Purple People Eaters, that entire era. But before any of that, Bud Grant was a professional athlete in 2 different leagues. Grant was drafted by both the NFL's Philadelphia Eagles and the Minneapolis Lakers of the NBA, and he initially chose basketball. He played with the Lakers and was part of their 1950 NBA championship team, and then decided to try football. In 1951, he joined the Eagles in his first season playing defense, and then Philadelphia moved him to receiver. And in 1952, Bud Grant caught 56 passes for 997 yards and 7 touchdowns. He finished 2nd that season in the NFL in receptions. Imagine that now. A guy leaves an NBA roster and within 2 years, he's one of the NFL's leading receivers. And Grant eventually left the NFL for Canadian football, where he became a star before transitioning into coaching. And obviously his coaching career eventually overshadowed basically everything everything he did as a player, but that's what makes this list fun. I mean, one of the most recognizable coaches in NFL history was casually an NBA champion before most people even knew who he was. Number 8, Dave DeBusschere. Now we're getting into people who were legitimately elite athletes. Dave DeBusschere is a basketball Hall of Famer, 8-time NBA All-Star, 2-time NBA champion with the New York Knicks, and eventually named one of the NBA's 75 greatest players ever. And somehow, baseball wasn't just some childhood hobby for him. DeBusschere was pitching in the major leagues. See, he played for Chicago White Sox in 1962 and 1963, and across 102 1/3 major league innings, he had a 3.09 ERA. An ERA like that is only saved for the elite of the elite starting pitchers. That's the part that got my attention, because if somebody tells you an NBA Hall of Famer pitched in the MLB, you'd probably assume he got shelled for 6 games and everyone moved on. But no, Dave DeBusschere could pitch, and after his MLB appearances, he continued pitching in the minor leagues while simultaneously playing professional basketball. And I know the minors don't particularly count for this list, but these stats are way too good for me not to read off. I mean, in 1965, he threw for 244 innings with a 3.65 ERA in the Pacific Coast League, a league notorious for home run ballparks. But eventually, he had to choose up, and he chose basketball, which was a great decision because he ended up becoming one of the most important Knicks in franchise history and eventually entered the Hall of Fame. But there is a completely believable alternate universe where Dave DeBusschere never becomes an NBA legend because he's too busy pitching every 5th day in the major leagues. Number 7, Dick Groat. Now, Dick Groat might have one of the weirdest resumes on this entire list. At Duke, he was an elite basketball player, 2-time All-American. He was selected 3rd overall in the 1952 NBA draft by the Fort Wayne Pistons, and then he went straight into professional basketball and averaged around 11 points per game as a rookie. 11 points as a rookie isn't terrible at all, except simultaneously, he was also a Major League Baseball player. And unlike almost everybody on this list, Groat didn't even need the minor leagues. He went directly from Duke to the Pittsburgh Pirates, and cutting off all those years of minor league grind, eventually baseball won. And I mean won. Because Groat ended up becoming an 8-time All-Star. He helped the Pittsburgh Pirates win the 1960 World Series, and that same season, he hit .325, winning the National League batting title. But the batting title isn't where the award stopped. Dick Groat was also named the National League MVP, and a few years after that, he won another World Series in St. Louis in 1964. So this guy went from legitimate NBA player to MVP shortstop. And the craziest part, Groat maintained that basketball was actually his favorite sport. Think about that. You're good enough at your 2nd favorite sport to win National League MVP. That's disgusting. Number 6, Ron Reed. Ron Reed is probably the most underrated athlete on this entire list because he doesn't have the same name recognition of Bo. He doesn't have Deion's personality, he wasn't a basketball Hall of Famer, nor was he an MLB MVP. He just quietly spent an absurd amount of time playing professional sports. Reed played 119 NBA games for the Detroit Pistons. He averaged about 8 points and 6 rebounds per game, which is pretty good role player numbers. So right there we've established he's a real NBA player. But then we move into the MLB, and in that, Ron Reed played 19 seasons of Major League Baseball. 19. Reed pitched 2,477 innings, won 146 games, and recorded 103 saves to tag along with a 3.46 career ERA. He made the 1968 National League All-Star team and even won the 1980 World Series with the Philadelphia Phillies. And as if his career wasn't unique enough, he also did some things that many who play baseball can't do. He started his career as a starting pitcher and eventually reinvented himself into a durable reliever. At one point, Reed became one of a tiny number of pitchers ever to compile both 100 career wins and 100 saves. So let's put this into perspective. Ron Reed played enough NBA basketball that 119 games isn't just some cameo, and then he went into a completely different sport and lasted nearly 2 decades. If we're ranking durability and sheer professional legitimacy across 2 sports, this guy is ridiculous. And somehow, outside of serious baseball fans, barely anybody talks about him. Number 5, Jim Thorpe. Now we get to arguably the greatest pure athlete on this entire list, Jim Thorpe. And I actually struggled with where to put him, because if this video were the greatest athletes who ever lived, Thorpe has an argument for number 1, period. He won Olympic gold medals in both the decathlon and the pentathlon in 1912, and he became one of the foundational superstars of professional football. He was part of the inaugural Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 1963, and his statue literally stands right outside of the NFL Hall of Fame. But remember our criteria, folks. I'm specifically ranking the 2 professional sports careers. And Thorpe's second career, baseball, was legitimate, but it wasn't spectacular. He played 289 major league games over 6 seasons with the New York Giants, Cincinnati Reds, and the Boston Braves, and he had a career batting average of .252 to tag along with 7 career home runs. So we're not talking about a baseball superstar, but we're also talking about a man playing Major League Baseball during the same general period that he was becoming one of the most important football players in history. And again, this is an Olympic gold medalist as well, folks. So Jim Thorpe wasn't really a 2-sport athlete. He was more like, whatever sport you happen to be playing, I'll probably figure it out. The only reason he isn't higher is because the 4 guys ahead of him have stronger cases for actually being high-level performers in both professional sports. But in terms of raw athletic insanity, Thorpe might still be the king. Number 4, Brian Jordan. And this is the guy I think modern sports fans need to know about, because Brian Jordan is probably the closest thing we've got to Bo and Deion without anybody really remembering him that way. See, Jordan was drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals in baseball, and then the Buffalo Bills drafted him in football. And Buffalo eventually released him, and he landed with the Atlanta Falcons. And by 1991, Brian Jordan was a legitimate NFL defensive back. He played all 16 games, led the Falcons in tackles, and was even named an alternate for the Pro Bowl. So understand what happened next. This wasn't some guy washing out of the NFL and trying another sport because he had nowhere else to go. Jordan was coming off a season where he was one of Atlanta's most productive defenders. And then suddenly, he chose baseball full time, and the results of it, a 15-year major league career, a career .282 hitter, 184 career home runs, and he drove in more than 800 runs. And in 1999 with the Atlanta Braves, he made the National League All-Star team after hitting 23 home runs and driving in a career high 115 runs. Now regardless, those numbers are absurd, but if you place those 23 homers and 115 RBIs outside of the steroid era, Brian Jordan would have gotten MVP votes. Now Jordan might be the most recent example of somebody who's done something that's incredibly difficult to prove. He probably could have had a serious career in either sport. The Falcons wanted him, the Cardinals wanted him, and eventually he had to pick. And baseball got an all-star. When people talk about the greatest 2-sport athletes ever and the conversation stops at Bo and Deion, Brian Jordan should be the first name somebody brings up next. Number 3, Gene Conley. Now alright, this might be my favorite story on the list. Gene Conley was 6'8", which is already ridiculous for a professional athlete in the 1950s. I mean, look at how we gawk over Aaron Judge and he's 6'8" in 2026, in a world full of mega athletes. But instead of choosing whether that body was better suited for basketball or baseball, he basically said, why choose? Conley was a major league pitcher, and a very good one, and he spent parts of 11 seasons in the MLB, pitching more than 1,500 innings and winning 91 games. He also made multiple All-Star teams, and in 1957, he was a member of the Milwaukee Braves team that defeated the New York Yankees to win the World Series. Cool, except Gene Conley also played in the NBA. He played more than 350 NBA games between the Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks, and he averaged roughly 6 points and 6 rebounds per game for his NBA career. So he wasn't Bill Russell on the court, but he was a legitimate rotation player. And when he joined the Celtics, he started collecting rings. 1959, NBA champion. 1960, NBA champion. In 61, you guessed it, NBA champion. Now do the math. Gene Conley won the World Series and then won 3 consecutive NBA championships. He became the first athlete to win championships in 2 major professional sports, and unlike somebody who played 5 games somewhere and happened to be on a championship roster, Conley maintained substantial careers in both sports. He could finish an NBA season and go back to pitching, and then finish baseball and go back to basketball. And that's why I have him at number 3. Not because he was the greatest basketball player on this list, because he wasn't, nor was he the greatest baseball player. But when you're specifically asking who had one of the most legitimate 2-sport professional careers ever, Gene Conley's resume is almost impossible to beat. 4 championships, 2 sports, and most sports fans today have no idea he existed. Now before we get to the obvious top 2, I have to mention some honorable mentions. Danny Ainge played 211 MLB games for the Toronto Blue Jays before choosing basketball, where he played more than 1,000 NBA games, became an NBA All-Star, and won 2 championships with Boston. And while what he did was great, his .220 Major League batting average is what ultimately kept him out of my top 10. Mark Hendrickson played 114 NBA games and then pitched for 10 MLB seasons. The longevity is ridiculous. He just never reached a particularly high peak in either league. Steve Hamilton played 2 NBA seasons and then lasted 12 years as a major league pitcher with a career 3.05 ERA. Now that ERA over 12 years is absolutely ridiculous. So Steve Hamilton did entice me to include him on this list. However, 2 NBA seasons just wasn't enough NBA production. Ace Parker played Major League Baseball before becoming the NFL's MVP in 1940 and eventually a Pro Football Hall of Famer. His baseball career just wasn't substantial enough for me to include him in the top 10. And lastly, there's Jim Riley. Now this man wasn't great at either sport. However, Riley played both professional baseball and hockey and remains the only person to this day to appear in both MLB and the NHL. Only 6 games in the MLB, only 9 NHL games, so he obviously isn't making this top 10. But the fact that in over a century of NHL and MLB history, exactly one man has played in both leagues tells you how insanely different those two sports are. Alright, enough stalling. You already know the final 2. The only question is the order. Number 2, Deion Sanders. Deion Sanders had the greatest overall career of any 2-sport athlete ever, and I'll say that immediately. Football, not even a discussion. Pro Football Hall of Famer, 8 Pro Bowls, multiple first-team All-Pro selections, Defensive Player of the Year, 53 career interceptions, 2 Super Bowl championships, and one of the greatest cornerbacks to ever live. I mean, the list goes on and on. But we're here because Prime wasn't just playing football. For 9 seasons, Deion Sanders also played Major League Baseball, 641 games and a career .263 batting average. Now, his counting stats don't pop out to you, but he did steal 186 bases over the length of his career. And unlike a lot of 2-sport experiments, Deion's baseball career had legitimately big moments. In 1992 with Atlanta, he reached the World Series and then went insane. Deion went 8 for 15 for a .533 batting average. He stole 5 bases and even threw a runner out at home. So had Atlanta won that World Series, there was a legitimate possibility that the NFL player standing in center field could have been named the World Series MVP. Think about that sentence. To this day, Deion remains the only person in history to play in both a World Series and a Super Bowl. But perhaps the craziest Deion story came earlier that postseason, when on October 11, 1992, Deion played an NFL game for the Falcons in Miami and then immediately left, traveled to Pittsburgh, and tried to join the Braves for their NLCS game that same day. Now, he didn't end up appearing in that baseball game, but who even attempts that? Today, teams would have 400 lawyers fighting each other before the plane left Miami. Deion was basically treating 2 major professional sports like a doubleheader, and that simultaneous part matters. Deion wasn't finished with baseball and then moved to football. He was doing both. He played baseball during 9 of his 14 NFL seasons. In September of 1989, he had a major league home run for the Yankees and scored an NFL touchdown for Atlanta within the same week. So why isn't Deion number 1? Because of the rule I established at the beginning. We're not just asking who was the greatest athlete who played 2 sports. We're asking who had the greatest 2-sport career, and Deion was a very good major league player, but football was clearly his dominant sport. The guy at number 1 reached a level of recognition that nobody else has ever reached in both. Number 1, Bo Jackson. Bo Jackson's number 1, and I went back and forth on this because Deion had the longer career. Deion accomplished dramatically more in football. I mean, he won championships, made the Hall of Fame, but there's one fact that separates Bo Jackson from everyone else who has ever attempted this combination. Bo Jackson became an MLB All-Star and an NFL Pro Bowler. Nobody else has ever done that. Not Deion, not Brian Jordan, nobody. And the craziest part is that Bo's football career wasn't even his primary career. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers selected him first overall in the 1986 NFL Draft. Bo refused to play for them. Instead, he went to Major League Baseball with the Kansas City Royals. Then the Raiders drafted him the following year, essentially allowing him to treat football as a second sport once the baseball season ended. And Bo somehow made that arrangement work. In 1989, Bo Jackson hit 32 home runs with 105 RBIs. He made the American League All-Star Game and was named MVP of that same All-Star Game. And then the baseball season ends and he joins the Raiders. And he averages 5.5 yards per carry. In the NFL, in the same year. The next season, Bo was selected to the Pro Bowl. His career average with the Raiders was around 5.4 yards per carry. Not pretty good considering he also played baseball. Nah. That's elite running back production. And meanwhile, on the baseball field, Bo was hitting 25, 28, 32 home runs, throwing runners out, running up walls, breaking bats over his knee and his head. But this is why Bo Jackson became almost mythical, because you're watching somebody perform physical acts in one sport and then turn on your television a few months later and he's doing completely different impossible things in another. But unfortunately, that's also what makes his story one of the biggest what ifs in sports history. In January of 1991, during an NFL playoff game, Bo suffered the devastating hip injury that effectively ended his football career. The Royals released him, and he eventually returned to Major League Baseball with the White Sox after surgery, missed the entire 1992 season, and came back again in 1993, eventually finishing his career with the Angels in 94. So Bo's prime essentially lasted a few years. That's it. But somehow during that tiny window, he did something nobody before nor since has duplicated. All-star in the MLB and a Pro Bowler in the NFL. That's why I have Bo over Deion. And if you ask me who had the better professional career, I'm picking Deion easily. Even if you ask me who accomplished more, that's still Deion. But if you ask me who came closest to simultaneously being a star in two completely different major professional sports, it's Bo Jackson, and I don't really think anybody else has matched it. So going through this list actually made the Kyler Murray situation even crazier to me, because look at when most of these guys played. Frank Baumholtz, Gene Conley, Dick Groat, Jim Thorpe, Ron Reed, heck, even Bo and Deion are now more than 30 years removed from their athletic primes. Modern sports have basically killed this archetype. Specialization, money, contracts, injury risks, a multitude of things. Teams investing hundreds of millions of dollars into individual athletes. Today, if an NFL quarterback told his team, yeah, after the season I'm gonna go play center field for an MLB team, his GM might actually have a heart attack. Which is why Kyler Murray fascinates me so much, because he's one of the few modern athletes where we know for a fact that this wasn't some fantasy. Major League Baseball thought he was good enough to be drafted 9th overall. The NFL thought he was good enough to go 1st overall. Whether he actually attempts baseball is a completely different question. But I want another one of these guys. I want another athlete where I'm watching an NFL game and thinking, didn't I literally watch this dude play baseball 2 months ago? I want sports to get weird again. So let me know, did I get number 1 right? Bo Jackson or Deion Sanders? And more importantly, who did I leave off this list that deserves to be here? I promise you, I combed over every single 2-sport athlete that was eligible for this list. But I'm only human. I could have missed somebody very important. So if you enjoyed the video, subscribe, drop a like, and check out my Kyler Murray video if you haven't already, because that's what sent me down this entire rabbit hole in the first place. And maybe one day, we'll actually get to put Kyler Murray on this list. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And until next time, Jahji, out.